Before we dive in, I've got a quick question for you. Where are you watching from right now? And what time is it? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far and wide our viewers are tuning in. Now, imagine this. Rimuru, the adaptive, suddenly enters the Overlord universe. What happens next? Let's find out. The air above the great forest of Tob begins to warp, not with the familiar distortion of tear magic, but with something far more unsettling, an instability that doesn't follow the rules of the new world at all. Mana recoils instead of gathering. Space folds inward as if reality itself hesitates, and then without fanfare or thunder, a small blue slime drops into existence. Rimuru Tempest doesn't arrive with hostility, nor with caution. He arrives with curiosity. The moment his form stabilizes, his perception expands outward, drinking in the unfamiliar structure of this world. Magic here feels layered, quantified, almost artificial. Before anyone even knows he's there, Rimuru is already analyzing it. Deep beneath the earth, alarms echo through the Great Tomb of Nazarick. Not audible alarms, conceptual ones. Systems designed by players, reinforced by world items, suddenly flag an unknown presence. This entity doesn't register as a player. It doesn't register as a monster. It doesn't register as anything in the Yggdrasil framework. To Nazarick, that's not just unusual. That's impossible. Demiurge freezes mid-calculation. Albedo's smile tightens. Somewhere on the 9th floor, Ainz Ooal Gown slowly opens his eyes. Rimuru, unaware of the panic he's caused, takes a step forward, and the land reacts. A passive defensive spell laid centuries ago activates, releasing a barrage of high-tier magic meant to erase intruders instantly. The explosion never happens. The spells vanish, swallowed whole as if they were never cast. Rimuru blinks, surprised, then amused. This magic system is fascinating, he thinks. Structured, limited, predictable. Raphael's voice flows calmly through his mind, already dissecting spell tiers, cooldown logic, and resistances. Inside Nazarick, the conclusion is unavoidable. This being didn't resist the magic. He didn't block it. He understood it. And in that single moment, the Great Tomb realizes something chilling. Whatever just entered their world is not bound by its rules, and for the first time since Nazarick's arrival, the tomb isn't the apex predator anymore. The moment those defensive spells disappear, the atmosphere inside Nazarick shifts from confusion to alarm. This isn't a matter of raw strength anymore. It's a violation of expectations. Spells designed to annihilate armies were erased as casually as breath in cold air. Demiurge's mind races, constructing and discarding hypotheses at terrifying speed. A hidden world item? A new class beyond Yggdrasil's limits? Or something worse? An existence that evolved without constraints? None of the answers sit well. Above ground, Rimuru kneels and presses a hand, if it can be called that, against the soil. Information floods in. The land is saturated with residual fear, soaked into the earth over years of domination. Cities ruled through terror. Monsters weaponized, not nurtured. Rimuru frowns. This world isn't broken. It's stalled. Growth here is controlled, capped, locked behind invisible ceilings, and those ceilings have a source. Somewhere deep underground, a structure radiates absolute authority. Ainz doesn't move immediately. He watches through layers of remote observation, forcing himself to remain still. Panic leads to mistakes, and yet even as he maintains his calm, a creeping unease settles into his mind. This entity is scanning the world the way a system scans data, not as a resident but as an outsider. Ainz recognizes that perspective. It's the same detached view he once had as a player looking down at NPCs. Only this time, he's on the other side of it. Rimuru finally notices Nazarick, not with his eyes but with awareness. A massive layered presence buried beneath the ground, bristling with hostility and preparation. Countless sentient beings bound by loyalty so absolute it borders on self-erasure. Rimuru pauses. He's felt devotion before, but this is different. These beings aren't choosing to follow. They're programmed to. The realization unsettles him more than any threat ever could. Without warning, the ground trembles as a gate opens at the edge of the forest. A skeletal figure in obsidian robes steps through, flanked by an overwhelming pressure that crushes the air itself. Ainz Ooal Gown has decided to make the first move, not with violence, but with presence. Rimuru turns, eyes bright with interest rather than fear. Two rulers face each other for the first time, and in the silence between them, the new world holds its breath. For several seconds, neither of them speaks. The forest itself seems to recoil, branches creaking under invisible pressure as two vastly different authorities collide without a single spell being cast. Ainz's aura spreads outward like a cold shadow, the weight of an absolute ruler who has erased nations without hesitation. Rimuru's presence, by contrast, is strangely soft, yet beneath it lies something endless, like an ocean that refuses to be measured. To Ainz, that contrast is deeply unsettling. Power is supposed to announce itself. This one doesn't need to. Ainz breaks the silence first, his voice calm, regal, perfectly controlled. He demands identification, affiliation, intent. Each word is a probe, layered with magic meant to extract truth or provoke reaction. Rimuru listens politely, tilting his head, genuinely intrigued. The spells slide off him unnoticed, analyzed and neutralized before they can even function. When Rimuru finally responds, his tone is casual, almost friendly. He introduces himself as Rimuru Tempest, a traveler who arrived here by accident. No threats, no bravado. And somehow that honesty feels more dangerous than any lie. Demiurge, observing from afar, feels a rare chill. There is no deception to unravel, no arrogance to exploit. Rimuru isn't underestimating Nazarick. He simply isn't intimidated by it. Raphael continues to process data in the background, mapping Ainz's undead physiology, his immunity traits, his mana reserves, even the faint echoes of player origin mechanics clinging to his existence. This isn't reconnaissance for battle. It's understanding. Ainz responds with measured courtesy, but inside alarm bells scream. This slime has already learned too much. Worse, he doesn't seem to need to try. Ainz subtly shifts the conversation, testing boundaries, mentioning Nazarick, its might, its guardians. Rimuru's eyes flick briefly toward the earth, directly at the Great Tomb's location. The gesture is unconscious, and it confirms Ainz's fear. Nazarick has been seen, not discovered through exploration, but perceived. The forest trembles again as multiple presences awaken deep underground. The guardians are ready. Shaltir's bloodlust spikes. Cocytus tightens his grip on his weapons. They wait for a command that doesn't come. Ainz hesitates. For the first time since conquering this world, he hesitates to escalate. Because if this turns into a fight, it won't be a battle of spells or numbers. It will be a battle of systems. And Ainz is no longer certain he is the superior one. Rimuru senses hesitation and smiles, not mockingly, understandingly. Whatever lies beneath this world, he thinks, was built by someone lonely, someone clinging to control because they feared losing everything. And as the wind passes through the forest, one truth becomes clear. The Great Tomb of Nazarick has not been invaded. It has been noticed. And that may be far worse. The moment stretches, fragile and heavy like glass on the verge of shattering. Ainz feels it, an instinct buried beneath layers of strategy and undead composure. This encounter is already beyond prediction. Even if he orders an attack now, even if Nazarick unleashes its full might, the outcome will not be clean. And Nazarick survives on certainty, on preparation, on control. Against Rimuru Tempest, none of those guarantees feel absolute anymore. Rimuru, meanwhile, is thinking about something else entirely. He isn't calculating how to defeat Nazarick. He's wondering why a being with this much power chose isolation over connection. The answer echoes faintly through Ainz's presence: loss, preservation, fear of erasure. Rimuru has felt that before. And instead of pressing forward, he does something no one in this world expects. He takes a step back. The oppressive pressure eases. The forest exhales. Rimuru openly states that he has no intention of attacking Nazarick, nor of ruling through fear. He explains simply, plainly, that his goal has always been coexistence, evolution, and choice. Ainz listens, unmoving. Every instinct tells him this could be deception, and yet there is no hidden blade in Rimuru's words, no ambition to conquer. If anything, there is an offer. Unspoken, but real. Demiurge rejects it instantly. An entity like this cannot be allowed freedom, not when it can rewrite the balance of the world just by existing. But Ainz doesn't respond. His mind drifts to something dangerous. Possibility. What if this slime isn't an enemy? What if he's a variable Nazarick cannot eliminate, but could learn from? The thought is terrifying and tempting. Rimuru turns away, signaling the end of the encounter, not as a retreat, but as a choice. As he moves, the world subtly adjusts, as if acknowledging his passage. Before leaving, he pauses and speaks one final line, not as a challenge, but as a warning. This world is changing, he says, and those who cling too tightly to control will be the first to feel it break. Then he's gone, melding into space, leaving behind silence and shaken certainty. Deep underground, Nazarick remains intact, undefeated, yet fundamentally altered. The Great Tomb was built to withstand invasion, conquest, and gods alike, but nothing in its design prepared it for this, for an existence that doesn't seek to destroy it, only to outgrow it. And as Ainz Ooal Gown stands alone in the quiet forest, one realization settles heavily in his mind. The greatest threat to Nazarick isn't an enemy who wants to tear it down. It's one who doesn't need to. The aftermath of Rimuru's departure doesn't fade. It lingers. Across the new world, something subtle shifts, like a chessboard where one piece has quietly changed its rules of movement. Inside Nazarick, emergency protocols remain active long after the threat is gone, not because danger is imminent, but because uncertainty has taken root. For a structure built on absolute foresight, that alone is catastrophic. Ainz retreats to the throne room, not for ceremony, but for clarity. The Guardians assemble before him, each radiating unquestioning loyalty. Demiurge is already speaking, outlining scenarios with surgical precision. Containment plans, elimination probabilities, the use of world items as last resorts. Yet even as the plans stack neatly atop one another, Ainz notices something disturbing. Every strategy assumes Rimuru can be forced into an outcome. None account for what happens if he simply adapts past them. Meanwhile, far from Nazarick's depths, Rimuru stands atop a cliff overlooking a human settlement he's never seen before. Smoke rises from chimneys, but the air carries tension rather than warmth. Soldiers patrol streets not to protect, but to intimidate. Rimuru watches silently, processing. In his world, power created responsibility. Here, it creates distance. And at the center of that distance stands one ruler above all others, the Sorcerer King. Rimuru decides not to hide. He lets his presence be felt, not as pressure, but as an invitation. A deliberate signal, controlled and precise, aimed directly at Nazarick. Ainz feels it instantly. This isn't a challenge, it's a request for dialogue. The room falls silent. Albedo stiffens. Demiurge's eyes narrow. The idea of meeting this being on equal footing feels wrong to them. Nazarick does not negotiate. Nazarick commands. But Ainz does something unexpected. He accepts. Their second meeting takes place in neutral ground, an empty plain under a gray sky, untouched by spells or structures. No armies, no guardians, just two rulers standing across from one another, stripped of spectacle. Ainz arrives cloaked in authority, his staff resting against the earth like a symbol of finality. Rimuru appears moments later, his form calm, unguarded, almost deceptively simple. This time the conversation is different. There is no probing, no hidden magic woven into words. Ainz asks a question he never thought he would ask another being in this world. What are you? Rimuru doesn't answer immediately. When he does, it isn't with titles or power levels. He speaks of growth, of change, of becoming something more than what you were forced to be. And for the first time, Ainz Ooal Gown doesn't respond as a king, but as a man who once logged into a game and never logged out. The silence that follows is not tense, but heavy, laden with unspoken understanding. Ainz listens, and in that moment Momonga resurfaces, if only faintly. Rimuru's words don't accuse or challenge, they reflect. Growth, change, choice. Concepts Ainz hasn't allowed himself to consider since the world stopped being a game. He tells himself this is a trap, a conversational ploy meant to disarm him, and yet no magic activates, no skill triggers. Rimuru is simply talking. Ainz responds carefully, choosing his words with the same precision he uses in war. He speaks of responsibility, of the burden of ruling beings who would shatter without his guidance. Nazarick exists because order must be enforced, he argues. Without fear, the world descends into chaos. Rimuru doesn't interrupt. He doesn't disagree either. He only asks a quiet question, whether that order exists for the world's sake or for Nazarick's survival alone. That question lands harder than any spell. Back in Nazarick, Demiurge monitors the exchange through distant observation. His unease deepens. This isn't diplomacy. It's erosion. Rimuru isn't trying to overpower Ainz. He's reshaping the framework of the conversation itself. Demiurge realizes something chilling. If Ainz begins to see Rimuru as an equal rather than a threat, Nazarick's absolute hierarchy could fracture. Loyalty born of design cannot compete with loyalty born of choice. Rimuru shifts the discussion, speaking openly about his own rule. He doesn't deny using force when necessary. He admits to mistakes, to battles that nearly destroyed everything he built. But he emphasizes one thing above all else. His people follow him because they want to. Power, to him, isn't about standing above others. It's about creating a system where others can stand beside you without fear. Ainz tightens his grip on his staff. He thinks of the Guardians, beings who would gladly erase the world if he commanded it. He thinks of how that devotion was written into their very existence. Is that loyalty real? The thought is dangerous. He buries it beneath layers of undead calm. But the crack remains. For the first time, Ainz offers something genuine in return. He admits this world was never meant to be fair, that he took control because if he didn't, someone worse would. Rimuru nods, understanding instantly. He doesn't judge. He simply states the truth Ainz has avoided. Control is easier than trust, but it comes at a cost. And that cost, sooner or later, always demands payment. The wind picks up across the empty plain, carrying dust between them like a slow, restless tide. Ainz feels exposed, not physically, but philosophically. Rimuru isn't pushing him toward surrender or submission. He's doing something far more dangerous. He's offering an alternative, one that doesn't require Nazarick to fall, but does require it to change. And change is the one variable Ainz has always tried to eliminate. Ainz counters with logic. He speaks of power structures, of inevitability. In this world, strength dictates survival. Mercy invites rebellion. He lists the kingdoms he's crushed, the wars he's ended before they could begin. From his perspective, fear saved lives. Rimuru listens, then calmly dismantles the argument, not by denying its effectiveness, but by pointing out its expiration. Fear works, he says, until something stronger arrives. And when that happens, everything built on fear collapses at once. That implication hangs in the air between them. Ainz knows exactly what Rimuru means. Nazarick's dominance is absolute, for now. But if even one being exists beyond its reach, the illusion of inevitability shatters, and Rimuru is living proof of that possibility. Rimuru then does something unexpected. He shares knowledge, not secrets of Nazarick, but insights into the new world itself, how its people adapt under pressure, how suppressed races eventually evolve beyond their chains. He speaks of monsters not as tools, but as societies waiting to happen. Ainz realizes with a quiet shock that Rimuru has already seen more of the world in days than Nazarick has in years, not through conquest, but through connection. Back in Nazarick, Albedo's composure fractures. She senses the shift in Ainz's mindset, subtle but undeniable. Demiurge clenches his fists. This slime is not an enemy general. He's an ideological threat, one that cannot be defeated with weapons. Ainz straightens, reasserting his authority. He asks the question that truly matters. If Rimuru's way is superior, why hasn't it consumed every world already? Rimuru smiles, not confidently but honestly, because it's slower, because it risks failure, because it requires trust in others instead of absolute control, and because not everyone is ready to let go of power once they have it. The plane falls silent again. Two rulers, two paths, neither entirely wrong, neither compatible forever. And Ainz understands now that coexistence isn't impossible, but it isn't stable either, not when both of them sit at the top. Rimuru takes a step back, signaling the conversation's end. He doesn't ask for alliance. He doesn't threaten war. He simply leaves Ainz with a choice: continue ruling a world that fears him, or begin shaping one that could one day stand without him. And as Rimuru fades into the horizon, Ainz remains still, haunted by a realization he cannot erase. For the first time since arriving in this world, the Sorcerer King is no longer certain that absolute domination is the final answer. Ainz remains on the plane long after Rimuru disappears, the gray sky offering no answers, only reflection. The world feels quieter now, not because a threat has passed, but because a truth has settled in. Rimuru didn't come to overthrow Nazarick. He came to expose its limitations. And that is a far more dangerous act. When Ainz finally returns to Nazarick, the Great Tomb feels different. The halls are the same, the guardians kneel as they always have, and yet the air itself seems heavier. Every report, every bow, every declaration of loyalty now carries an unspoken question beneath it. Is this devotion chosen or enforced? Ainz dismisses the thought as weakness, but it lingers, refusing to fade. Demiurge resumes his strategic briefings with renewed intensity. He argues that Rimuru must be contained before his influence spreads further, not through battle, not yet, but through narrative. Control information, shape perception. If Rimuru becomes a symbol of an alternative future, Nazarick's authority will erode without a single blow being struck. Ainz listens. He understands the logic, and still he hesitates. Elsewhere, Rimuru walks openly among the New World's people, his presence unhidden. He doesn't declare himself a king. He doesn't demand reverence. He helps rebuild a burned village, heals the wounded without asking for allegiance, listens to grievances long ignored. Word spreads, not of a conqueror, but of a ruler who doesn't rule through terror. Each story is small. Together, they form something dangerous. Ainz observes from afar, torn between two instincts. One urges him to act decisively to erase the variable before it grows. The other, quiet, almost forgotten, wonders what might happen if he doesn't. Nazarick was built to stand eternal, unchanged. But eternity without evolution is stagnation, and stagnation, as Rimuru has shown, is just another form of decay. The Guardians sense the conflict within their master, even if they don't understand it. Albedo's devotion sharpens into desperation. Demiurge's calculations grow darker, more extreme. If Ainz wavers, they will act in his stead, not out of rebellion, but out of love. And that, more than anything, terrifies him. As the segment closes, one truth becomes unavoidable. The meeting of supreme rulers did not end in alliance or war. It ended in divergence. Two beings with godlike power walking different paths through the same world. And somewhere between fear and freedom, the new world begins to shift, slowly, inexorably, toward a future neither of them can fully control. Even after the philosophical standoff, Ainz cannot ignore the practical realities of power. Rimuru Tempest isn't merely an anomaly. He is a variable that cannot be predicted, controlled, or constrained by any of Nazarick's existing systems. And while words can be ignored, actions cannot. If Rimuru's presence spreads unchecked, the foundations of the Sorcerer King's dominion could begin to erode in ways subtle yet irreversible. For that reason, Nazarick decides that Rimuru must be tested. Not destroyed, not captured, but measured. The first test is subtle, almost imperceptible. Shadows shift in the forest and Rimuru senses them immediately. Alarms don't ring. Instead, conceptual barriers designed by the Floor Guardians activate, revealing themselves only to a mind capable of perceiving them. Shaltir Bloodfallen emerges first, summoned not for battle but for evaluation. Her presence is terrifying. A vampiric beauty whose instincts are honed for annihilation. She approaches Rimuru with deadly grace, fangs bared, her eyes glowing with a mixture of curiosity and bloodlust. And yet, even before contact, Rimuru adapts. He absorbs the residual mana in the air, analyzes Shaltir's movement patterns, and instinctively counters her attacks, not with brute force, but with intelligence and fluidity that defies the conventions of this world. Shaltir lunges, unleashing her full array of vampiric powers, but every attempt is met with seamless adaptation. Rimuru isn't merely dodging. He is learning, evolving, and internalizing her abilities in real time. He mirrors her strength, neutralizes her curses, and even recreates countermeasures that Shaltir herself had never anticipated. The clash is intense, but in the end, Rimuru stands unharmed while Shaltir halts mid-motion, bewildered. Demiurge watches remotely, calculating probabilities, and is forced to adjust his models on the fly. Rimuru defies every metric designed to predict combat outcomes. Not long after, Cocytus, the Floor Guardian of combat perfection, steps forward. A warrior whose entire existence revolves around honor, strategy, and physical supremacy, Cocytus is unconcerned with subtleties. He engages Rimuru with a fury designed to break the opponent physically, mentally, and conceptually. The earth shakes beneath their movements. Spells and weapons collide with explosive force, and yet Rimuru adapts to every assault in seconds. Cocytus attempts to exploit what he believes are gaps in Rimuru's understanding of YGG Drasil mechanics, but Rimuru anticipates even the invisible conceptual weaknesses. Each strike Cocytus delivers is absorbed, replicated, or countered in a manner so elegant it borders on artistry. For a being who has lived entirely within rules and structure, Cocytus has encountered a force that transcends them. Meanwhile, deeper within the Great Tomb, Ainz observes in silence. His strategic mind races through the implications. Rimuru's adaptability isn't just tactical, it's philosophical. Every Guardian's approach, every test of strength, serves only to reveal that Rimuru isn't simply surviving. He is integrating the system itself into his existence. If this continues, Ainz realizes with a cold certainty, Rimuru could eventually wield Nazarick's own defenses as extensions of his own power. The thought is simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. As the tests continue, the battlefield evolves. Spells meant to incapacitate become learning tools. Traps designed to eliminate invaders are turned into neutralized, harmless curiosities. Rimuru's analytical mind treats every attack as data. Every magic formula, every physical assault, every psychological ploy is cataloged, understood, and converted into functional adaptation. Even the Floor Guardians, beings whose loyalty is absolute, begin to feel the subtle but unmistakable imbalance. Their master's defenses, meant to be unquestionable, are being dissected by an outsider with no visible limits. And then Demiurge, recognizing the escalation, decides to intervene. But not in the way Rimuru expects. Instead of overwhelming him with force, Demiurge introduces layered challenges designed to test intelligence, perception, and loyalty. Complex illusions, psychological traps, and moral dilemmas are set into motion. Rimuru navigates them with uncanny precision, not simply bypassing the traps, but reconfiguring them in his favor. Every guardian involved realizes in that instant that this is no ordinary confrontation. This is an entirely new class of existence, one that forces the strongest, the most disciplined, and the most loyal to rethink everything they know about power. Rimuru's presence on the battlefield transforms the dynamics of Nazarick's evaluation process. The tests, originally designed to assert dominance, have instead become a reflection of his adaptability. The Guardians no longer perceive him as merely an intruder. They recognize him as a force that could fundamentally change the rules that define their existence. And in that moment, even the rigid, unquestioning loyalty of Nazarick begins to crack. Not in disobedience, but in realization. The world has introduced something beyond the measure of their power, and the Great Tomb, for all its might, must confront the impossible. The battlefield itself begins to feel alive. Every step Rimuru takes, every ripple of his form, resonates with the residual magic of Nazarick. Spells designed to immobilize him are absorbed and converted into energy he can use. Traps meant to ensnare his movement fail before they can trigger. Even the terrain seems to respond to his presence, warping subtly as if reality itself recognizes a being outside its normal parameters. Cocytus presses harder, unleashing strikes meant to annihilate, but Rimuru sidesteps, merges, and adapts so fluidly that the Guardian starts questioning the nature of this confrontation. This isn't victory or defeat. It's evolution in motion. Meanwhile, Demiurge escalates the challenge. Instead of overwhelming Rimuru physically, he begins to manipulate the battlefield conceptually. Illusions overlay reality. False guardians emerge. Scenarios designed to confuse, trap, or frighten the slime are set in motion. Yet Rimuru doesn't panic or overreact. His analytical mind parses the layers, separating truth from deception, and even begins to anticipate the patterns behind Demiurge's manipulations. What was supposed to be a test of perception turns into Rimuru integrating the strategies of Nazarick into his own understanding of the world. Every guardian watching realizes with a quiet unease that the rules they live by, rules written into the very essence of the Great Tomb, cannot contain him. Shatters, recovering from her earlier confrontation, steps back into the fray. This time, she fights differently, not with reckless aggression, but with precision and strategy, hoping to exploit patterns in Rimuru's adaptive behavior. Yet even as she launches sophisticated combinations of vampiric attacks, Rimuru doesn't just counter, he anticipates. He mirrors traits he observed in her movements, integrating them into his body and magic, effectively creating a feedback loop that evolves in real time. The clash is a display of elegance and raw power, a spectacle of adaptation versus structured dominance. Every observer, even the guardians who have never doubted themselves, feels the overwhelming pressure of watching something unprecedented unfold before their eyes. Ainz, observing silently from a distance, notes the subtle changes in the battlefield. The Guardians are beginning to react, not just to Rimuru's abilities, but to the realization that he doesn't conform to the systems they understand. Each Guardian is trained to perceive threats and respond predictably. Yet Rimuru defies every expectation. He transforms challenges into lessons, turning every attack, spell, and trap into an opportunity for growth. The implications are staggering. A being who can assimilate and adapt at this scale doesn't just survive, it rewrites the rules of conflict itself. As the test progresses, Rimuru begins to explore the deeper mechanics of Nazarick's magic. He analyzes lingering enchantments, world item effects, and layered defensive systems. Slowly, he integrates them into his own power set, not to claim them, but to understand them fully. The floor beneath his form hums with residual energy, the air crackling as the system of the Great Tomb meets a mind that exists beyond limitation. For the Guardians, this is more than confrontation. It is revelation. For Ainz, It is both exhilarating and terrifying. The entity they are meant to control is evolving into something that may surpass even Nazarick itself. Even the smallest interactions carry weight. A single spell cast by Shatters is not simply neutralized. It is studied, deconstructed, and reincorporated into Rimuru's consciousness. Every maneuver Cocytus executes is mirrored and improved upon. Demiurge observes silently, calculating and recalculating, yet he begins to suspect there is no final probability to measure. Rimuru is not just learning, he is teaching himself the rules of this world and then quietly bending them around him. And with each passing moment it becomes more apparent. Nazarick's greatest strength, its absolute structure and unquestionable hierarchy, may be exactly what makes it vulnerable to this intruder. The confrontation escalates further when Demiurge decides to test Rimuru in ways the Guardians themselves cannot. It isn't enough to measure strength or reflexes. He must understand whether Rimuru can navigate the intricate social and psychological systems that govern Nazarick. Through a series of illusions, moral dilemmas, and carefully constructed scenarios, the slime is placed in situations designed to force choice under extreme pressure. Which Guardian to trust? Which illusion hides a lethal trap? Which path maintains survival while respecting unseen rules? Rimuru does not hesitate. He evaluates each variable, anticipates consequences, and acts decisively, often resolving situations before the Guardians themselves fully realize what is happening. This is not simple adaptation. It is an intelligence beyond expectation, a consciousness capable of understanding systems and rewriting them from the inside out. Shatters, frustrated yet fascinated, observes Rimuru closely. Every time she tries to corner him, he shifts, learns, and exploits the most subtle opportunities. Cocytus, too, begins to alter his approach. No longer relying purely on brute force, he begins predicting Rimuru's adaptations and adjusting his combat flow accordingly. And still, every attempt ends the same. Rimuru absorbs, adapts, and neutralizes. The Guardians, trained to think of themselves as invincible within their designated roles, begin to realize a profound truth. The entity they are observing doesn't simply survive attacks. It incorporates them, turning opposition into growth. Ainz, watching from afar, experiences a tension he has rarely felt since becoming the Sorcerer King. For years, Nazarick has operated under strict, absolute rules. Every Guardian's behavior, every trap, every spell was predictable, measurable, and enforceable. But Rimuru operates outside of those constraints. He does not follow rules, nor does he break them. He transcends them. This realization shakes the foundation of everything Nazarick represents. Even Demiurge, the master strategist, cannot predict with certainty what Rimuru will do next. The tests continue, becoming progressively more complex. Floor Guardians engage in coordinated assaults, combining their strengths in ways designed to overwhelm any intruder. Shatters manipulates blood magic with precision. Cocytus weaves through offensive and defensive strikes with calculated brutality. Aura and Mare employ tactical maneuvers, calling upon creatures and summoning traps with layered contingencies. Yet Rimuru meets every challenge without strain, observing patterns, adjusting strategies, and exploiting every advantage offered by the world itself. The Guardians realize this isn't combat. This is a form of evolution in action. Demiurge, analyzing from the control room, begins to recognize the unthinkable. Rimuru is not merely countering threats. He is learning the underlying principles of Nazarick itself and improving upon them. He is understanding how the Guardians operate, how the hierarchy functions, and how Ainz's power is structured, not to destroy it, but to transcend it. Every system designed to be absolute is now being studied, adapted, and incorporated by an entity that does not belong to the rules of this reality. Shatters, overwhelmed yet unable to look away, finds herself reconsidering her assumptions. Cocytus, trained to measure threat levels by raw power, begins to notice subtleties in Rimuru's movements that defy the very logic of combat. Aura and Mare, creatures of tactical innovation, realize that Rimuru is not only responding to their strategies, but subtly redirecting their own creations in ways they cannot fully control. Even Sebas, observing the ethical constructs of the tests, senses a moral intelligence beyond ordinary calculation. And then the ultimate test is initiated, not by overwhelming force, not by strategy, but by the very concept of Nazarick itself. Demiurge begins to manipulate the environment, the rules of the land, and the Guardian's very perceptions, creating a scenario designed to probe the limits of Rimuru's understanding. It is a test of adaptability, resilience, and perception. Rimuru approaches it with the calm focus of one who has faced countless worlds, countless rules, and countless systems. He moves through the trials with precision, unraveling illusions, countering unseen forces, and navigating moral and logical conundrums with an elegance that none of Nazarick's greatest minds had anticipated. By the end of the day, the Guardians are exhausted. Demiurge is reevaluating his own calculations, and Ainz himself feels the weight of a realization he cannot ignore. Rimuru Tempest is not merely an intruder, nor is he an opponent. He is a force of adaptation and evolution, an entity that assimilates, understands, and transcends the systems designed to control him. For Nazarick, the great tomb that has withstood gods, monsters, and countless enemies, the greatest test is not whether Rimuru can be defeated. It is whether any structure, any hierarchy, can contain a being who exists beyond rules themselves. The next phase of the test pushes the Guardians and Rimuru beyond the limits of conventional combat. Demiurge orchestrates a multi-layered scenario designed to stress not just Rimuru's adaptability, but his decision-making under pressure. Entire sections of the battlefield shift unpredictably. Illusions overlay reality, and magical traps are triggered in combinations no mortal or even immortal could fully calculate in a single moment. It is a test meant to overwhelm, to crush the intruder through complexity and force. Yet Rimuru navigates it with calm precision, analyzing patterns as if they were part of a puzzle he had seen countless times before. He anticipates movements, predicts magical effects, and integrates every attack into his ever-expanding understanding of this new world. Shatters attempts to corner him again, using a combination of vampiric speed, life-draining magic, and blood-manipulating attacks. But Rimuru adapts mid-motion, neutralizing her strategies while simultaneously applying elements of her own powers to enhance his counters. Cocytus, sensing the futility of frontal assaults, begins varying his techniques, combining brute strength with tactical feints and layered defenses. Yet each attempt is met with Rimuru's fluid intelligence, countered before the Guardians themselves realize the scale of what is happening. Even Aura and Mare, coordinating summoned beasts and environmental hazards, find their efforts neutralized or subtly redirected, creating openings Rimuru exploits effortlessly. As the test progresses, Ainz observes in silence, the weight of realization pressing down. This is not simply a test of power, this is a demonstration of evolution in real time. Rimuru does not just survive, he learns, integrates, and improves at a rate that even the greatest minds of Nazarick struggle to comprehend. Every Guardian involved recognizes an unsettling truth. Their absolute loyalty, their perfect strategies, and even the world-shaping authority of Ainz Ooal Gown itself can be studied, countered, and reinterpreted by a single entity operating beyond the known limits. Demiurge, usually so confident in calculations and probabilities, begins to recalibrate. His models, designed to predict outcomes of even the most chaotic battles, are rendered incomplete. Rimuru does not merely adapt physically, he analyzes concept, pattern, and logic simultaneously, turning the battlefield itself into a tool for understanding rather than confrontation. For a system built on predictability and absolute authority, this is unprecedented. The Guardians begin to experience subtle shifts in perception. Shatters, Cocytus, Aura, Mare, Sebas, they sense that their usual dominance, the unquestioned certainty of their power, no longer guarantees control. Every strike they execute, every magical effect they summon, is now potential data for Rimuru's rapid integration. Even the air around them feels different, charged with the knowledge that the rules they obey implicitly are being rewritten before their eyes. Ainz reflects on the implications in the throne room as he watches remotely. Rimuru's adaptability is not a threat in the conventional sense. He has not yet sought to destroy or dominate. But the ability to learn, evolve, and integrate complex systems instantaneously poses a far more insidious danger. For the first time, Ainz recognizes that his dominance relies not just on power, but on the assumption that others cannot transcend the rules he imposes. Rimuru shatters that assumption. By the end of the test, the battlefield is littered with exhausted guardians, illusions dissolved, and magical traps neutralized. And yet, not a single attack from Rimuru is malicious. He does not boast. He does not gloat. He simply exists as an entity beyond constraint, having proven through action what words cannot convey. That adaptation can surpass authority, evolution can challenge domination, and a being need not wield destruction to surpass the greatest power in the world. The final realization settles in heavy and unspoken. Nazarick may be built to resist armies, gods, and players alike, but it has never faced a mind like Rimuru's, an entity capable of integrating absolute systems into its own being and emerging stronger, wiser, and fundamentally untouchable. And as the Great Tomb continues to hum with residual energy, Ainz and his guardians must confront a terrifying truth. The tests were never meant to defeat Rimuru. They were meant to measure him, and what they have measured may be something no one in Nazarick can contain. The presence of Rimuru in the Overlord universe doesn't remain a private affair confined to the forests near Nazarick or the silent halls of the Great Tomb. Word spreads, as it inevitably does, carried by whispers, rumors, and the faint but undeniable ripples of magical perception that cross borders faster than any messenger. Kingdoms that once relied on brute strength, political manipulation, and the threat of annihilation begin to notice subtle anomalies. Monsters behave differently, towns gain courage they shouldn't possess, and scattered factions discover an unexpected ally appearing in the shadows, an entity whose power rivals that of the Sorcerer King, yet whose methods are entirely alien to the old ways of domination. Rimuru's influence is neither immediate nor forceful, yet it is impossible to ignore. Where he appears, suppressed races, beings who have spent generations under tyranny, begin to flourish. Villages previously crushed under taxation, slavery, or intimidation suddenly find themselves capable of resistance, not because Rimuru fights for them, but because he empowers them to believe in their own potential. Every act, from healing the sick to creating structures for safety, resonates with an invisible but undeniable shift. The world itself is learning a new definition of power. Fear no longer dictates allegiance. Respect and trust begin to plant themselves in its place. The Dragon Lords, ancient beings of terrifying strength, feel the tremors of this change first. They have watched the world for centuries, maintaining balance through carefully measured threats and territorial dominance. But Rimuru's presence defies their calculations. Creatures previously subjugated by strength and intimidation and suddenly act with coordination, intelligence, and strategy. The natural order, once defined by sheer power, begins to fracture. Even the mightiest dragons pause and observe, sensing a force capable of shaping reality not by conquest, but through influence and adaptation. Ainz, aware of these developments, begins to confront a reality he has long avoided acknowledging. His dominance over the new world, built through absolute fear and the unquestioned loyalty of Nazarick's guardians, is now challenged, not by a conventional enemy, but by a being whose power operates on principles entirely foreign to him. Rimuru doesn't seek war, yet every action he takes undermines the structures of control that have long dictated survival. Villages, kingdoms, and even minor factions adjust their strategies instinctively. recognizing that a new apex of power exists, a power that cannot be predicted, restrained, or bargained with in the traditional sense. The political landscape begins to warp. Kingdoms that once relied on intimidation suddenly see their peasants, soldiers, and allied tribes questioning old hierarchies. The slain theocracy, for instance, experiences internal unrest as clerics and soldiers alike interpret Rimuru's deeds as proof that devotion need not be born of fear. Monster clans previously crushed under human rule now rise with confidence, inspired not by conquest, but by cooperation and tangible acts of protection. And even neighboring kingdoms, long rivalrous and suspicious of one another, start to form tentative alliances when Rimuru's presence subtly encourages stability over chaos. The very concept of power in the new world begins to shift. Ainz, observing from Nazarick, understands that his dominance is no longer absolute. It is now conditional. To maintain control, he must account for forces that cannot be constrained by threat or coercion. The Guardians, too, sense it. Albedo's loyalty, flawless for centuries, now carries a weight of uncertainty, subtle and imperceptible, yet undeniably present. Demiurge recalculates every potential scenario, yet Rimuru's influence always lies outside the model. Even the rules of engagement themselves, the way monsters fight, the way kingdoms negotiate, the way magic flows, are subtly reshaped wherever Rimuru steps. Meanwhile, Rimuru continues his journey through the new world, not as a conqueror, but as a catalyst. Cities once controlled entirely by fear see their populations organize autonomously, creating systems that prioritize efficiency, survival, and mutual benefit. Towns once threatened by raiders find themselves protected by organized militias that Rimuru has guided indirectly, teaching strategy and resource management without ever demanding obedience. Even the creatures of the wild, dragons, goblins, and minor demons alike, begin forming alliances, not because they are forced, but because they see tangible benefits in cooperation. And then the ripple reaches the far corners of the world. Ancient rulers and hidden powers, beings who have observed the world for centuries, take notice of a force that defies conventional metrics of power. The Dragon Lords recognize Rimuru not as a threat to confront immediately, but as a variable that must be monitored carefully. Kingdoms that relied solely on intimidation find themselves vulnerable, their people emboldened in ways that were previously inconceivable. And even among the strongest entities, a quiet fear begins to emerge. The new world may no longer operate according to the rules they thought immutable. Rimuru, moving silently across the land, seems almost unaware of the chaos his mere existence is causing. He doesn't seek conflict. He doesn't demand worship. Yet every village empowered, every monster clan organized, every oppressed people emboldened sends a message that reverberates faster than any cannon, faster than any army. The old balance, the one maintained through fear, domination, and rigid hierarchy, is cracking. And Ainz, observing it from the safety of the Great Tomb, begins to realize a terrifying truth. The presence of Rimuru has introduced a new axis of power, one that does not operate on fear, domination, or coercion, but on evolution, adaptation, and the subtle influence of choice. Even the Guardians, who have never questioned their roles or the supremacy of Nazarick, begin to feel the shift. Shaltir notices the defiance in formerly submissive towns. Aura and Mare sense coordinated strategies among minor monster clans, and Cocytus recognizes that brute strength alone is no longer the measure of dominance. And deep within the Great Tomb, Ainz feels a weight he hasn't experienced in centuries, the uncertainty that comes from realizing that his control over the new world is no longer absolute. The stage is set. The balance of power, once rigid and predictable, now wavers. Fear no longer rules as the sole arbiter. Influence is shifting toward adaptability, cooperation, and choice. And Rimuru, without declaring war or seizing thrones, has become the catalyst for a transformation so profound that the new world itself begins to question what dominance truly means, and who, if anyone, can claim it. As Rimuru continues to traverse the new world, subtle yet profound changes ripple outward. Villages that once cowered under oppressive regimes begin to develop self-governance, not because he enforces it, but because his presence inspires confidence. Farmers organize militias to protect themselves, small towns establish trade networks previously thought impossible, and minor monster tribes coordinate patrols to secure territory against predators. These are not grand gestures of war or conquest. They are acts of survival and intelligence, fostered quietly by Rimuru's philosophy of empowerment. And everywhere he goes, word spreads faster than any official decree could travel. A being exists whose power surpasses fear itself, whose influence grows without coercion. The kingdoms closest to Nazarick feel the tremors first. Their spies report villages functioning independently, monsters organizing without orders, and entire regions beginning to resist the oppressive influence of established rulers. The slain theocracy sends envoys to investigate these anomalies, but they find nothing overtly threatening, only evidence of coordinated growth and the subtle encouragement of oppressed peoples. Magicians and clerics who have spent years interpreting the world through doctrines of fear and obedience start noticing something that unsettles them deeply. Power no longer belongs solely to those who enforce it. Choice and adaptation now carry weight, reshaping society in ways no army or spell could achieve. The Dragon Lords, ancient beings who have watched over the world for centuries, recognize the shift even more acutely. They do not intervene, at least not yet, but they sense that Rimuru's presence introduces a new variable, one capable of restructuring the natural order. Dragons that once relied on intimidation to control their territories begin observing human settlements and monster tribes alike, noting that previously subjugated populations are adapting, learning, and thriving in unprecedented ways. Where fear once dictated behavior, strategy and collaboration now begin to dominate. Even creatures of immense power begin to acknowledge that their supremacy is no longer guaranteed. Back in Nazarick, Ainz watches from his throne room as the reports flow in. At first, he approaches them as data points to be analyzed, statistical anomalies, patterns to be predicted. But as the breadth of Rimuru's influence becomes clear, Ainz's calm composure is challenged. The Great Tomb was built to be untouchable, a fortress where absolute authority reigns. And yet, Rimuru is doing something far more insidious than siege or invasion. He is reshaping the world's understanding of power. Kingdoms, villages, and monster clans are evolving without Nazarick ever laying a hand on them. Fear alone no longer ensures compliance, and even the most loyal entities within Ainz's reach might begin to question their own obedience. The Guardians themselves feel the consequences of this shift. Shatters, who thrives on domination and combat, notices the subtle increase in confidence among the humanoid and monster populations that Rimuru encounters. Cocytus, whose strength lies in the execution of absolute tactics, begins recognizing that Rimuru's influence is neutralizing the effectiveness of rigid strategies. Aura and Mare, always attuned to logistics and organization, see new systems of coordination emerging among previously fragmented groups. Even Sebas, whose moral compass is guided by the defense of the weak, senses the profound ethical impact of Rimuru's actions. Nazarick's rigid hierarchy, designed to operate in a world defined by absolute control, is now experiencing cracks caused by an entity who doesn't even seek to dominate. The new world itself begins to respond. Magic, previously concentrated in predictable flows dictated by rulers and powerful artifacts, starts to behave in ways subtly altered by Rimuru's existence. Ley lines, once stable, pulse faintly in new directions. Areas previously inhospitable to life begin to show signs of growth and regeneration. Monsters that once obeyed only through fear exhibit innovative tactics when faced with danger. The ecosystem, society, and political structures are quietly realigning, not because Rimuru demands it, but because he demonstrates that survival and advancement can be achieved through intelligence, cooperation, and adaptation. As these changes accumulate, the old balance, The one maintained by intimidation, centralized power, and rigid hierarchies, starts to crumble. Monarchs and warlords discover that their subjects can no longer be controlled solely by fear. Monster tribes resist domination in ways previously unthinkable. Even the dragon lords, observing from their ancient perches, sense a fundamental alteration in the distribution of power and influence. The world is learning to function under new rules, where absolute strength is no longer the only metric that matters. And through it all, Rimuru remains a quiet catalyst, moving from settlement to settlement, village to village, kingdom to kingdom. He doesn't impose himself. He doesn't declare supremacy. He simply demonstrates possibility. Every small act, a healing, a defensive strategy, a moment of guidance, ripples outward, creating momentum that cannot be ignored. Kingdoms, monsters, and populations begin to adapt instinctively, responding to the presence of a force that does not dominate, yet commands attention. The balance of the new world, once seemingly stable and eternal, shudders on its foundations, and every observer, friend or foe, realizes that a new era has quietly begun. The consequences of Rimuru's presence continue to unfold like a slow-moving storm, touching every corner of the new world in ways that are impossible to ignore. Kingdoms that once relied solely on armies and political intimidation find their carefully constructed hierarchies challenged by a subtle, pervasive shift in perception. Peasants question the logic of fear-driven rule. Soldiers and mercenaries begin improvising tactics rather than blindly following orders. Even local governors notice that communities are organizing themselves in ways that bypass traditional authority. And all of it traces back, in some inexplicable way, to the quiet influence of a blue slime moving through the world, observing, guiding, and empowering without ever demanding obedience. The impact on monster clans is equally profound. Goblins, orcs, and lesser demons that once lived under strict hierarchies now experiment with cooperative strategies, forming alliances that were unthinkable before Rimuru's arrival. Hunting, defense, and resource allocation are no longer dictated solely by brute strength or fear. They are informed by intelligence, adaptability, and collective decision-making. Even the dragon lords, those ancient and arrogant beings who have long considered themselves untouchable arbiters of power, watch these developments with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Where once fear maintained balance, Rimuru demonstrates that influence, when wielded wisely, can rewrite the rules entirely. Ainz Ooal Gown, observing from the safety of Nazarick, cannot dismiss the implications. Reports flow in from his agents, magical reconnaissance, and even subtle changes in mana flow across the land. Every adjustment Rimuru incites, whether a village organizing its own militia, a monster tribe coordinating defenses, or an oppressed faction reclaiming territory, represents a potential disruption to Nazarick's carefully constructed dominance. For the first time, Ainz confronts the reality that power based solely on fear, no matter how absolute, is insufficient to maintain control in a world where a being like Rimuru exists. Inside the Great Tomb, the Guardians begin to feel the ripple effects of this shift. Albedo's devotion remains unwavering, yet she senses a subtle tension, a latent uncertainty born from witnessing the indirect consequences of Rimuru's actions. Cocytus, who measures strength through direct engagement, realizes that the battlefield is no longer a complete indicator of dominance. Even if Nazarick's forces were deployed in full, Rimuru's influence would continue to grow beyond direct confrontation. Shatters, Aura, and Mere observe with a mix of fascination and trepidation. A single entity is reshaping society, magic, and strategy without directly engaging them, and there is nothing in their training or programming that allows them to counter such indirect influence effectively. The changes are not limited to humanoid or monster populations. The ecosystem itself begins to respond subtly to Rimuru's presence. Previously barren or inhospitable regions start to show signs of regeneration. Ley lines shift, directing magical energy in ways that support growth and stability rather than mere destructive potential. Predators and prey adjust their behaviors not just instinctively, but in coordinated patterns that suggest intelligence and learning. Rimuru's influence functions as a catalyst for evolution, accelerating adaptation across species and communities alike. The world, in essence, begins to learn from him. Even the political and military powers that once seemed untouchable, kingdoms long considered dominant, feel their authority eroding. Rumors of Rimuru spread faster than armies or edicts can contain, emboldening rebels, inspiring cooperation among rivals, and shifting loyalties in ways that cannot be coerced. Kingdoms that maintain control through intimidation suddenly face internal friction as populations begin questioning the old ways. Advisors, generals, and even monarchs sense a change they cannot quantify. The very definition of power is being rewritten, and the old methods of domination may no longer suffice. Rimuru, moving through these lands, remains a calm and quiet force. He doesn't seek to rule or conquer. Instead, his actions inspire confidence, adaptability, and cooperation. Every village empowered, every monster clan organized, and every oppressed population emboldened contributes to a wave of transformation that spreads across the new world. The old balance, once maintained by fear, domination, and rigid hierarchy, continues to fracture under the weight of influence, intelligence, and adaptation. Even Ainz cannot ignore the magnitude of what is happening. For centuries, he has ruled with absolute certainty, confident that his authority, backed by Nazarick's overwhelming power, is unassailable. Yet Rimuru demonstrates that dominance rooted in fear is vulnerable to evolution, innovation, and the quiet empowerment of others. The Great Tomb, the Guardians, and the Sorcerer King himself face a new reality. The world is no longer static, and the balance of power, once so carefully maintained, has begun to shatter. The first cracks appear subtly, almost imperceptibly, but they widen with each passing day. Kingdoms that relied on intimidation began to crumble under the weight of inspired populations. Monster tribes that were once predictable now operate with ingenuity and cooperation. Even ancient dragons, observing from their lairs, recognize a shift in the hierarchy of the world. A world no longer dictated solely by fear, but increasingly influenced by Rimuru's quiet but unstoppable presence. The new world, in every corner and in every system, begins to move toward a new equilibrium, one in which absolute authority no longer guarantees stability and where intelligence, adaptability, and influence can redefine dominance. And at the center of it all, unassuming yet omnipresent, Rimuru Tempest continues his journey, the catalyst for a transformation so profound that the balance of power itself is now uncertain. As the ripple effects of Rimuru's presence expand, the cracks in the established order grow wider and more pronounced. Kingdoms once secure in their dominance experience unrest that cannot be quelled by traditional means. Populations begin to act independently, challenging decrees not out of rebellion, but because they have learned, however subtly, that survival and prosperity no longer require subjugation. Soldiers hesitate, nobles question commands, and administrators find themselves unable to enforce authority the way they once did. Fear no longer operates as the ultimate currency of power. Influence, adaptability, and vision begin to carry weight, and every action Rimuru takes accelerates this transformation. Even the Dragon Lords, those ancient arbiters of balance, cannot ignore the change. Previously, their dominion over both monsters and the world itself was unquestioned. Their presence alone commanded respect or fear, maintaining equilibrium through sheer intimidation. Yet Rimuru's approach, subtle, empowering, and inherently nonviolent, begins to redefine what strength means. Tribes and minor kingdoms that once deferred automatically to superior forces now act with initiative. They strategize, communicate, and adapt, creating networks of resilience that do not require interference from the great dragons or anyone else. The old hierarchy, based on raw power and fear, is dissolving before their eyes. Back in Nazarick, Ainz feels the weight of this transformation with unprecedented clarity. The Great Tomb, a fortress designed to be untouchable, now faces a variable it cannot quantify. The Guardians, loyal and powerful beyond comprehension, report anomalies, subtle shifts in power structures, and increased independence among populations Rimuru has touched. Albedo's unwavering confidence is tinged with concern. Cocytus begins questioning strategies that were once foolproof. Demiurge recalculates probabilities endlessly, yet Rimuru remains outside of every model. Even Sabas senses the subtle ethical implications, villages that flourish without coercion, monsters that organize for survival rather than domination, forcing him to reconsider what strength truly means. The new world itself seems to respond to Rimuru. Ley lines pulse faintly in new directions. Magical energy subtly shifts to support growth and stability, and areas previously hostile to life begin to regenerate. Even the creatures of the land, once predictable in their behavior, adapt, form alliances, and display intelligence previously unseen. Rimuru's philosophy of empowerment, subtle as it is, has triggered an evolutionary wave, reshaping ecosystems, societies, and even political structures. Where fear once dictated the flow of influence, adaptability, and cooperation now begin to define it. Rimuru's movements, seemingly quiet and unassuming, carry consequences that ripple faster than armies or magic could enforce. Every town empowered, every monster clan organized, every population emboldened contributes to the unraveling of old hierarchies. Kingdoms that have relied on intimidation and control experience internal friction, as rulers realize their authority is no longer absolute. Advisors, generals, and even monarchs sense that the rules of power have shifted in ways they cannot fully grasp. Rimuru's influence does not require confrontation. It simply exists, and the world instinctively responds. As the weeks and months pass, the balance of the new world shatters more clearly. Territories once predictable now behave unpredictably. Villages self-organize for defense and trade. Monster tribes coordinate strategies autonomously. Ancient dragons and other powerful entities realize that even their immense strength is not enough to dictate outcomes when populations operate on intelligence, adaptation, and cooperation. Every system, from governance to magic to social hierarchy, begins to shift in subtle yet irreversible ways. In Nazarick, Ainz realizes a truth that chills him more than any battle ever could. Rimuru has introduced a new axis of power, one that cannot be destroyed by force, contained by strategy, or predicted by calculation. Absolute authority, long the foundation of his dominion, is no longer sufficient. The Guardians, too, recognize the unsettling reality. Their power remains immense, yet even they cannot dictate the future against a force that evolves, adapts, and inspires without confrontation. And yet Rimuru does not act as a conqueror. He does not demand allegiance, enforce laws, or impose his will. He exists as a catalyst, a spark igniting change through influence rather than fear. His philosophy, actions, and presence transform the new world quietly but inexorably, empowering life and reshaping power itself. Kingdoms, monsters, and populations all adjust, not because they must, but because they are learning a new form of strength, one rooted in adaptation, cooperation, and the potential of every being to rise beyond imposed limitations. By the time the sun sets across the vast lands, one reality is undeniable. The old order, the rigid structure of dominance enforced by fear, intimidation, and power, is fracturing. The new world is moving toward a future defined not by who can crush others, but by who can inspire, adapt, and evolve. Rimuru Tempest, unassuming and quiet, has become the epicenter of this transformation, a force reshaping societies, ecosystems, and hierarchies alike. The balance of the new world has shattered, and in the void, a new era begins to take shape, one that even the Sorcerer King and Nazarick must reckon with. The tension between Rimuru and Ainz Ooal Gown has been building silently, like magma gathering beneath a dormant volcano. Words have been exchanged, philosophies tested, and influence spread across the new world, yet neither ruler has struck the first blow. But subtle shifts in power and perception are never neutral. Every village empowered by Rimuru, every monster clan reorganized, every kingdom emboldened, even the smallest ripple, represents a challenge to Ainz's supremacy. And the Sorcerer King, who has ruled through absolute authority for centuries, recognizes that a confrontation is no longer a possibility to avoid, it is inevitable. It begins with the Guardians. Reports flood in from every corner of the Great Tomb. Anomalies in magic readings, unusual concentrations of mana, and intelligence networks behaving in ways that defy expectation. Demiurge, ever vigilant, warns that Rimuru is no longer simply an intruder or an observer. He has become a variable that destabilizes the world itself. Even Cocytus and Shaltir admit the unnerving truth. Every measure taken to contain, anticipate, or neutralize Rimuru is met with adaptation, learning, and counteraction. The slime is no longer a threat to be battled. He is a force to be contended with, one whose abilities defy the traditional metrics of supremacy that Nazarick was designed to uphold. Ainz convenes his strategy in the throne room, flanked by his guardians. Maps, magical readouts, and reconnaissance reports cover every surface. But no calculation offers certainty. Rimuru is unpredictable, yet efficient. He does not seek unnecessary confrontation, yet every step he takes reshapes the world in ways that undermine the Sorcerer King's dominance. The ethical, tactical, and philosophical ramifications weigh heavily on Ainz. He knows the clash is unavoidable because the new world cannot sustain two forces of absolute power operating on fundamentally incompatible principles. Rimuru operates on empowerment, adaptability, and influence. Ainz operates on absolute control, fear, and structure. Their coexistence is not sustainable. The first overt signs of confrontation emerge not on the battlefield, but across the political and ecological systems of the New World. Kingdoms that once obeyed fear-driven laws quietly resist orders. Monster clans refuse to bow to traditional hierarchies. Dragons and ancient entities recalibrate their alliances. Everywhere, Rimuru's influence undermines the very structure of authority that Ainz has long considered unshakable. Every guardian dispatched to investigate reports subtle, unsettling truths. Populations act independently, adaptively, and intelligently, influenced by Rimuru's philosophy. Each observation compounds the urgency. The longer Rimuru remains free, the more difficult it will be for Nazarick to assert control. Ainz ultimately decides that subtlety has reached its limit. A plan is formulated, not merely to attack, but to assert supremacy decisively. Demiurge coordinates a complex deployment of the Guardians, combining intelligence, magic, and raw force into a single, coordinated operation. The goal is clear. Rimuru must be tested at the highest level, his limits exposed, and his influence curtailed. Yet, even as plans are laid, Ainz cannot ignore the intellectual and philosophical threat Rimuru poses. Unlike other opponents, Rimuru cannot be intimidated, coerced, or corrupted. He cannot be predicted fully, and he adapts instantaneously to new conditions. The Sorcerer King knows that any clash with Rimuru will be unlike any battle he has faced before. Meanwhile, Rimuru moves with the calm inevitability of a force whose purpose transcends mere survival. He has no desire to provoke conflict, yet he is acutely aware that Ainz will not allow his influence to spread unchecked. Rimuru's strategies are subtle, elegant, and indirect. He reinforces villages, strengthens defenses, and fosters cooperation among monsters and humans alike. Every choice increases the complexity of the world's systems, making any direct confrontation with Nazarick more challenging. Rimuru doesn't seek war. He seeks equilibrium. But equilibrium that undermines domination inherently attracts opposition. The new world itself senses the looming clash. Ley lines pulse with tension. Forests stir with the movements of creatures previously thought docile. And the winds carry whispers of anticipation from villages, castles, and monster lairs alike. Even distant kingdoms begin mobilizing, sensing the presence of two incomparably powerful entities whose coming confrontation will redefine the meaning of supremacy. Rumors spread faster than armies, creating a psychological pressure across the land. Populations begin choosing sides not out of loyalty, but because survival demands adaptation to the unfolding reality. A collision of absolute forces is imminent. Ainz prepares personally, stepping beyond strategy and calculation into the realm of presence. The throne room, usually a place of contemplation, becomes a war chamber. Magical sigils flare, weapons are readied, and the guardians assemble with lethal precision. Every spell, trap, and contingency is calculated to perfection, but Rimuru, as always, exists outside the parameters of prediction. Ainz understands this fully. No amount of preparation guarantees victory, because Rimuru's strength lies not only in raw power, but in adaptability, intelligence, and influence that extend beyond the battlefield itself. As the Guardians take their positions, the tension is palpable. Both rulers understand that this clash is not merely about territory, armies, or magic. It is about philosophy, about the very definition of supremacy. Ainz represents the world as it has always been, absolute, unyielding, ruled through fear and enforced loyalty. Rimuru represents the world as it could be, adaptable, cooperative, and strengthened by empowerment rather than intimidation. The collision of these ideals is inevitable, and the consequences will echo far beyond the reach of even the most powerful magic. In the quiet moments before the inevitable confrontation, the Sorcerer King and the Slime occupy opposite ends of the same world. Neither has struck yet, but every movement, every observation, every subtle influence has been laying the groundwork for the inevitable. The Guardians, the Dragon Lords, the kingdoms, and even the very environment of the new world seem to hold their collective breath. When Rimuru and Ainz finally meet, not as diplomats, but as forces of irreconcilable power, the clash will be total, absolute, and unavoidable. The first sparks of confrontation flicker on the horizon. Magical energy crackles, landscapes warp under the weight of potential destruction, and the air hums with anticipation. The Slime and the Sorcerer King, each a supreme being in his own right, are poised at the precipice of conflict. And in the hearts and minds of all who witness it, a single truth crystallizes. The supremacy of the new world will be determined not by history, not by fear, and not by brute force alone, but by a collision of philosophies, wills, and unimaginable power. The first clash begins not with a shout or an explosion, but with presence. Rimuru, calm and measured, steps into the clearing outside a once thriving kingdom now reshaped subtly by his influence. His form, fluid and almost ethereal, seems to radiate quiet authority, an authority not enforced through fear, but through the unspoken understanding that he represents possibility. Ainz Ooal Gown arrives moments later, his black armor gleaming under the muted sun, the weight of centuries of dominance pressing against him like a tangible force. Even before a spell is cast or a weapon swung, the world recognizes that this is not a skirmish. It is a confrontation of ideals, a collision of absolute power and unyielding philosophy. The Guardians form a semicircle around Ainz, their eyes fixed on Rimuru. Albedo's gaze burns with a mix of loyalty and apprehension. Cocytus's muscles tense, ready to strike with perfect timing. Demiurge monitors the battlefield with unflinching precision, calculating probabilities down to fractions of a second. The air is thick with tension, and magical energy hangs heavy, almost visible in the way the grass sways unnaturally and the winds twist into subtle eddies. Every creature, from the smallest insect to the largest dragon in the vicinity, senses the approaching collision. Even distant kingdoms and monster clans feel the pulse of inevitability, as if the very universe is holding its breath. Rimuru speaks first, not with arrogance, but with calm clarity. "I do not wish for conflict," he says, his voice carrying a resonance that reaches the minds of all present. but I will not step aside when the balance of this world is at stake. Ainz's response is measured, deliberate, tinged with the authority of a being who has ruled unchallenged for centuries. Neither do I, Rimuru Tempest. Yet you leave me no choice. Your influence spreads like wildfire, and Nazarick will not allow its supremacy to be questioned. The words themselves crackle with latent energy. With a flick of his hand, Ainz triggers a ripple of magic that reshapes the battlefield, forming barriers, summoning undead constructs, and calling forth layers of protective enchantments designed to neutralize Rimuru before he can fully react. But Rimuru, fluid as ever, adapts instantly. He senses the magical fluctuations, absorbs and analyzes the energy, and reformulates his own mana to counteract it without hesitation. The first invisible shockwave of the clash washes over the land, leaving minor tremors, scorched earth, and the faint smell of ozone in its wake. The Guardians surge forward, attempting to overwhelm Rimuru with coordinated attacks. Shatters lunges with lethal speed, her vampiric powers enhanced by layered spells. Cocytus strikes with devastating force, each blow calculated to break both body and strategy. Aura and Mare flank from both sides, summoning beasts and manipulating the environment to channel Rimuru into traps. Yet for every attack, Rimuru adapts, neutralizes, and integrates. Every Guardian strategy becomes part of his analysis. Every spell absorbed or mirrored into an extension of his own power. What was meant to overwhelm becomes a tool for comprehension and counteraction. Even the environment responds violently. Trees are uprooted by residual magic, mountainsides crack under the weight of destructive energy, and rivers boil and twist as the clash escalates. Rimuru moves with fluid grace, almost dancing through the chaos, while Ainz manipulates time and space through layered spells that twist reality itself. Each movement, each adjustment, represents a battle of minds as much as bodies. For every counter Rimuru deploys, Ainz formulates a more complex and unpredictable response, creating a feedback loop of strategy, power, and adaptation that leaves even the most experienced Guardians reeling. And yet, despite the intensity, neither side strikes recklessly. This is a battle of supremacy, not mere destruction. Rimuru's calm, analytical responses clash with Ainz's precise, authoritarian control, creating a spectacle of magic, skill, and ideology that shakes the foundations of the world itself. Small villages, monster clans, and even distant kingdoms witness the shockwaves, realizing that the contest they are witnessing is not merely between two powerful beings, it is the shaping of a new era. Every spell, every maneuver, every calculated counter sends the message clearly. Supremacy is no longer determined by fear alone, and the new world will be forever changed by the collision of these titans. The battle escalates beyond anything the new world or even Nazarick has ever witnessed. Spells collide with the force of mountains, magical energies ripple like crashing waves, and the air itself seems to quiver under the intensity of two beings who exist on entirely different planes of power. Ainz manipulates necromancy, reality-warping magic, and time-altering spells, creating attacks that would crush even the most formidable opponents in a single strike. Yet Rimuru, flowing like water, counters each with a fluid elegance that is as much analytical as it is instinctive. He absorbs, adapts, and repurposes, turning Ainz's overwhelming power into a cascade of energy that bends reality subtly around him. The Guardians, witnessing this display, begin to feel the true magnitude of their clash. Shatters, for all her vampiric speed and ferocity, finds her attacks mirrored and redirected with perfect timing. Cocytus's strength, honed over centuries, is absorbed and neutralized in mid-strike. Aura and Mare's coordinated flanking maneuvers, designed to overwhelm with numbers and strategy, fail to catch Rimuru off guard. Demiurge recalculates scenario after scenario, yet even his immense intellect struggles to predict Rimuru's next move. The battlefield has become a dynamic, ever-shifting entity, reflecting not just the raw strength of the combatants, but their philosophies, strategies, and understanding of power itself. Ainz intensifies his efforts, summoning shadows that twist reality, skeleton armies that swarm like a living tide, and magical constructs that manipulate gravity and time. He strikes with precision, targeting weaknesses, probing for a flaw in Rimuru's seemingly perfect adaptation. But Rimuru does not falter. Every attack is analyzed, broken down into its constituent parts, and absorbed into his ever-expanding arsenal. With each counter, he grows, not just in strength, but in understanding, his mind and body becoming an extension of the very battlefield itself. What was intended to overwhelm him only strengthens his presence, forcing even Ainz to acknowledge, however silently, the enormity of what he faces. The landscape itself begins to transform under the sheer magnitude of their clash. Mountains crumble, rivers boil and twist, and the sky becomes a canvas for the immense magical energies colliding above. Villages and kingdoms that once relied on rigid hierarchies and intimidation now watch in awe and fear, sensing that the future of their world is being rewritten in real time. Even the Dragon Lords, who have long observed the new world from a distance, feel the tremors of this unprecedented confrontation. Their ancient wisdom tells them that this is not merely a battle of strength, but of ideology, intelligence, and influence, a test of supremacy that could redefine the hierarchy of the entire world. Despite the chaos, Rimuru remains calm, almost serene. He does not fight with malice, nor does he seek destruction. His strikes are precise, his defenses flawless, and his responses instantaneous. Each movement is calculated not only to neutralize Ainz's attacks, but to preserve the balance of the new world wherever possible. Villages are shielded from collateral damage, monsters caught in the crossfire are spared, and ecosystems adapt rather than collapse. Rimuru's philosophy manifests in his combat, not as a weakness, but as a form of absolute control that challenges the very notion of what it means to be powerful. Ainz, however, is relentless. Every calculation, every spell, every guardian's movement is designed to test Rimuru to his limits. He manipulates space to divide, time to confuse, and necromantic energies to overwhelm. Yet Rimuru adapts faster than Ainz can anticipate, merging strategies, countering attacks, and subtly influencing the battlefield to maintain equilibrium. The clash is no longer measured in strength alone. It is a war of intellect, adaptation, and philosophical dominance. Each action carries weight, each counter carries consequence, and every observer, from the smallest villager to the most powerful dragon, recognizes the stakes are greater than any battle before. As the battle progresses, the distinction between attack and defense blurs. Rimuru absorbs, integrates, and evolves, transforming Ainz's most devastating spells into extensions of his own will. Ainz escalates further, summoning layers of reality-warping constructs that challenge perception itself, yet Rimuru navigates them effortlessly, predicting their interactions before they fully manifest. It is a clash of supremacy in its purest form. Not merely the mightiest, but the most adaptable, the most intelligent, and the most influential are tested. In the shadows, the Guardians begin to understand the unsettling truth. Rimuru is not merely fighting. He is teaching, evolving, and reshaping the world's systems with every maneuver. Shatters' attacks, once absolute, now serve as data for Rimuru's adaptation. Cocytus's strikes, once unstoppable, become lessons in pattern recognition. Even Demiurge, calculating probabilities that would doom lesser opponents, recognizes a limitation. Rimuru exists outside conventional metrics. The new world is not merely witnessing a battle, it is witnessing the birth of a new hierarchy, one that may redefine supremacy entirely. And in the midst of this maelstrom, the Sorcerer King and the Slime, two forces of ultimate power, continue their duel. Neither has been bested, neither has faltered, and yet both recognize a single, terrifying truth. The clash is inevitable, unstoppable, and far-reaching. What begins as a battle of supremacy has evolved into a war of ideologies, strategies, and philosophies. a confrontation whose consequences will echo across the new world for centuries to come. The battle reaches a scale that defies comprehension. Mountains are shattered, rivers boil and twist in impossible currents, and the skies are painted with streaks of mana and energy that bend the very light. The land itself quakes as Ainz and Rimuru push the boundaries of power, their every action resonating across the new world. The Guardians move with lethal precision, but even they are now secondary players in a contest that transcends combat. It is a test of supremacy, philosophy, and the very definition of strength. Every strike, every counter, every burst of magical energy ripples outward, subtly altering kingdoms, empowering monsters, and inspiring populations. Ainz, with the weight of centuries of unchallenged dominance pressing down upon him, begins to realize the magnitude of Rimuru's uniqueness. Here's a being whose power is not only immense, but infinitely adaptable, integrating attacks, strategies, and even philosophies into a constantly evolving form. Every calculated spell and summoned army is met with responses that are both defensive and preemptively strategic. Rimuru's approach transforms the battlefield itself into an instrument of evolution, reshaping the rules of engagement while maintaining the delicate balance of life around him. Despite the chaos, Rimuru fights with a calm and calculated purpose. His attacks are precise, his defenses flawless, and his awareness spans beyond the immediate battle. Villages remain unharmed, monster tribes are guided subtly rather than crushed, and the flow of the natural world adapts without collapsing. Rimuru embodies not just power, but the philosophy of influence without domination, a concept foreign and unnerving to Ainz, who has ruled through fear and absolute authority for centuries. Each clash is a lesson, each counter a demonstration that supremacy can exist beyond intimidation and raw force. Ainz escalates further, unleashing constructs that manipulate time, gravity, and even perception itself. Necromantic forces surge like living tides, while barriers and illusions fracture reality around them. Yet Rimuru navigates each obstacle effortlessly, integrating attacks and manipulating the environment with instinctive precision. The Guardians watch in awe and trepidation, realizing that their coordinated strategies are now data for Rimuru's adaptation. No tactic, no spell, no combination of power can fully contain him. Every attempt to dominate is absorbed, learned, and, in subtle ways, repurposed against the very system that unleashed it. The new world itself responds to this unparalleled clash. Populations and kingdoms previously constrained by fear begin to observe, learn, and adapt. Monster clans reorganize with intelligence and strategy that rivals the most disciplined armies. Even ancient dragons sense a shift in the hierarchy, recognizing that traditional dominance is no longer the ultimate measure of power. Across vast distances, lands and peoples are touched by the ripple effects of this battle, an invisible but unstoppable wave of adaptation and influence, altering the very fabric of society, magic, and survival. The confrontation becomes more than a duel. It becomes the embodiment of competing philosophies. Ainz represents absolute control, fear-driven authority, and rigid hierarchy. Rimuru represents adaptability, empowerment, and the quiet evolution of systems beyond coercion. Each clash of spells, each exchange of force, echoes this ideological struggle, turning the battlefield into a stage upon which the very meaning of supremacy is contested. There is no turning back, no compromise that can satisfy both principles simultaneously. The collision is total, inevitable, and reshaping the world itself. As the battle reaches its climax, both combatants pause briefly. Ainz, calculating the infinite possibilities before him, and Rimuru, analyzing patterns and anticipating consequences. For a heartbeat, the new world seems suspended, waiting, watching, feeling the weight of these two supreme forces poised at the brink. And then as the tension reaches its zenith, the collision resumes with renewed intensity, magic tearing the skies, the earth fracturing beneath their feet, and energies clashing in ways that blur the line between creation and destruction. It is a fight without precedent, a contest that cannot be measured in simple metrics of victory or defeat. Both Rimuru and Ainz understand the stakes. Supremacy in this world cannot be shared, yet it also cannot be fully destroyed. The new world itself is the battlefield, and its balance teeters on the edge of transformation. Every observer, villagers, kingdoms, monsters, even distant dragons, realizes that this confrontation will define the future of all life, society, and magic. And yet, in the midst of the chaos, one truth becomes undeniable. This is not a battle born of hatred, conquest, or malice. It is a collision of inevitability, a clash of supremacy where the strongest minds and the most adaptable powers meet to define a new era. Rimuru and Ainz are not enemies in the traditional sense. They are forces of evolution and authority, each challenging the other to redefine what it means to be supreme. As the dust settles, at least for a moment, the world watches in silent awe. The clash has reshaped not just the battlefield, but the minds, strategies, and philosophies of everyone who witnesses it. Kingdoms tremble with the realization that supremacy is no longer absolute. Monster tribes evolve beyond predictability, and even the most ancient forces understand that the new world will never be the same. Rimuru Tempest and Ainz Ooal Gown stand unyielding yet transformed, embodying the truth that power is not static and supremacy is always contested. And there you have it, the unimaginable encounter between Rimuru Tempest and Ainz Ooal Gown, a clash that shook the foundations of the Overlord universe and left the new world forever changed. Who truly holds supremacy? That, my friends, is a question that may never have a simple answer. One thing is certain: when titans collide, the world itself becomes the battlefield, and the ripples of their power echo across time and space. Before you go, let me know in the comments, which side would you have chosen if you were in this new world? Rimuru's adaptable evolution or Ainz's absolute authority? And if you enjoyed this deep dive into a multiverse clash, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because here at LoreCity, we explore the what-ifs that shake entire universes.